Hello, Runnels Christian Church and friends. I'm Pastor Katie Russell Hainline here to offer a meditation on Jesus' I am statement, I am the resurrection and the life. This is the final meditation in our series on the I am statements of Jesus, and this one can be found in the Gospel of John, chapter 11. I'll read just verses 17 through 27 from the NRSV translation. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." This I am statement takes place in the gospel story of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. It's a long story, 44 verses, so I didn't read it all for you today, but I hope that you will go to your own Bible and read it for yourself. Although we call this story the raising of Lazarus, Lazarus has very little to do with it at all. Most of the action of the story revolves around his sisters, Martha and Mary. The gospel writer concludes the story by saying that many who witnessed Jesus call Lazarus out of the tomb believed in Jesus as a result. It doesn't tell us anything about what Lazarus does with his newfound life. Lazarus is a minor character in this narrative, and for this reason and many others, Rob Fuquay, the author of the book The God You Can Know, says this isn't a story for the dead at all. It's a story for those who have to live with death. You're probably most familiar with this story, not for the I am statement, but for the other famous verse it contains. Jesus wept. This verse is famous because in many of our English translations of the Bible, this is the shortest verse in our sacred text, and it captivates us that something so deep and profound can be conveyed in just 2 words. We're also touched by the way this verse tells us that Jesus weeps, an action that shows just how human he really was. What I find fascinating, though, is that Jesus weeps even though he seems to know how this whole story is going to play out. When he first learns that Lazarus is ill, he says, "This is not an illness that leads to death." When Lazarus dies and Jesus does decide to go to be with Martha and Mary, he tells the other disciples, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep," as if he knows the condition is not permanent. And when he arrives and we hear Martha utter that gut-wrenching statement, "If you had only been here, Lazarus would not have died," Jesus says with confidence, "Lazarus will rise again." Jesus says all of these things before he even sheds a single tear. Jesus seems to know from the very beginning what he is going to do for Lazarus, but he isn't in a hurry to do it. He stays 2 days before even going to be with Lazarus. And when he arrives and finds Lazarus has already died, he doesn't rush to the tomb. He stands around for 27 verses, talking to Mary and Martha and the crowd around them. He doesn't try to make it better right away. He doesn't rush to the resurrection. Instead, he sits with Mary and Martha and everyone who grieves, and he weeps with them too. Jesus weeps because even the one who will rise from the dead, even the one who raises others from the dead, knows that death is powerful. Jesus' tears for something he knew was coming reminds us that even when death is expected, it can still hit us like a punch to the gut. Jesus' tears for those who surround Mary and Martha, who weren't related to Lazarus but come to console them, remind us that even when death is distant, when it happens to someone we don't know very well, or in a place far away like Wuhan or Italy or New York City, it's still something we grieve. Jesus' tears for Martha, who says between sobs, "I know he will rise again on the resurrection on the last day," remind us that even when we have faith, we still cry for death. Jesus' statement, "I am the resurrection and the life," is a promise of our own resurrection. We are assured that the one who calls Lazarus to new life will call us to new life too. But more than that, it is a statement for those of us who have to live with death. For Martha and Mary and those who gathered around them. The story tells us we can grieve. We can long for a different outcome. We can wonder where Jesus is in our grief. We can cry. We can do all of those things and still have faith that Jesus is the resurrection and the life. Grief is never a sign of unbelief. So if you find that you are grieving right now, if you grieve for lives that are lost to the coronavirus, if you grieve for relationships that are hard to maintain in a time of social distancing, if you grieve for paychecks that have been lost because of economic instability, if you grieve for a way of life that in just 30 days seems long gone, I hope you don't feel that your faith demands you look for a silver lining or put on a happy face or rush to resurrection. It's okay to not be finding new life right now. It's okay to sit a while and weep, because even Jesus did that. Amen.